Arrin Sutliff creates site-specific and time-based work using plants, flowers, and digital media. Based in DC, Arrin is the owner of Tint, Floral, which focuses on design for weddings and events. Informed by the season, she relies on local growers and nurseries for blooms and foliage. Over to you, Arrin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. There are so many flowers like this. I feel like every time we do this class, it looks very different just because of what's available. And I feel like right now there are so many flowers and also so many really great things to forage. Today, we are going to mostly focus on like how to approach a design, specifically something done in like a lower type bowl. And in the past, we've kind of done these classes where it's like half lecture, half demonstration. And I don't know who all of you out there have participated in the last one, but we kind of split it up this time. So there was a lot of like base information on care and like choosing material and sourcing and all of that. We kind of put that all into like a nice packaged class that's more of a lecture format. So if you're interested in any of that and like tools, etc., that recording will be posted soon. And today we're going to focus more on like dedicating this time to design. Oh, let me actually grab one thing. So the arrangement that I'm actually going to make today is kind of like all different colors, but I did want to, my usual approach to palette is I try to stick with 2 colors. So I'm not necessarily going to do that today, but I thought it would be helpful for you to see what that looks like, because the flowers that I was able to get this week, I think my original approach to design is always like, see what's available. I always bring up the Alice Waters approach to cooking, because she says like, go to the farmer's market, see what's available, and then base your recipe on that. Like, don't try to make shakshuka when it's not tomato season, because it's just not going to taste as good. So unless you are trying, like if you're working for an event and you have to have a particular palette, that's one thing. But if you're designing for your home and you can have some more flexibility, my number one approach to like choosing flowers is just choose what looks best and like speaks to you mostly. But I do want to talk about like a focused palette a little bit, because I think that would be helpful. So in the image that you see next to me, this was all based off of this mango. It's mango season, so I hope you've been enjoying it. If not, it's just the start of mango season, so you still have lots of time. But it's really nice to find one thing that has a lot of different colors in it, and you can base a palette on that. So I'll give you another example. This peony has like these dark specks in it. You can also see it on the back, these like these darker pink specks. So in my case, when I see these darker pink specks, it like gives me the idea to pull in like potentially maybe a little bit of purple, potentially maybe a little bit of smoke bush. Like this is smoke bush. The smoke bush would really like pull out those flecks. This one doesn't have a ton in it, but here we have this one. So you can kind of like pull out, like make the flowers more dynamic when you kind of bring out the colors within those flowers. This ranunculus over here is probably going to fall apart in my hand. It's like on its last leg, but like in the center of this, it was like also like these really deep red maroons. So a lot of times, like when you're looking for flowers, if you want a more focused palette, choosing one thing that already like looks really good in nature and kind of basing your palette off of that is a really nice way to have a focus. And so in the image that you see next to me, it kind of started with this mango, and I was like, okay, there are definitely like some yellows in here. There are some really pretty oranges. There are some reds, and we have green. And so all of these things just already looked really amazing in nature. And so I kind of pulled together a palette based on that. Like you could see, I did pull in a little bit of white just because I often think white is like a really good highlight color, especially if you're designing for indoors. It's a little bit different now because the days are so long and we have a lot of natural light in our homes potentially. But in the winter, especially, like I might have a palette, but still pull in a little bit of white because white will kind of like make it pop and draw your eye to it, so it doesn't just like feel like a dark corner. Even if it's full of color, sometimes it's hard to see if you don't have a highlight color. So I did pull a little bit of white in here, but you see those yellows come out, you see the reds come out, there's like a little bit of peach, and it's all kind of based off of this mango. So it's one thing to think about when you're choosing your material. You could always start with like a piece of fruit. I have a nectarine in there too because the nectarine really pulled the reds in a little bit more. I don't know if you can see it, but there's hypericum berry right behind the nectarine. It's like a red berry, so I was pulling in some of that red. And so that's how I could build a palette that doesn't feel like super crazy to me, feels kind of contained. And for my style, I generally like working with more like form versus like shape is really important to me. Like if this was black and white, like would you still be able to see negative space? Would you still be able to see form? So I think that like paring down the colors and kind of containing, like limiting yourself, constraint can be really good. And having the constraint of like, I'm going to work within like the yellows and oranges and reds, which happen to all be next to each other on the color wheel. We won't get too much into color theory today, but it is always fun to, when you make an arrangement, to kind of go look at the color wheel after and kind of like, if you really like something, see where the colors used fall on the wheel so that you can potentially replicate that. So are they analogous colors, like right next to each other? Are they on the opposite sides of the wheel? Is it monochromatic? A big part of my personal practice is like just experimentation. And then with that experimentation, instead of just making things and like either being happy with them or unhappy with them, really asking myself, why do I like it? Like, is it because there are a lot of big blooms here and a lot of airy blooms here? Is it because of color? Like really kind of studying what I do after, so that I can be intentional about making similar decisions in the future. So I'm going to make an arrangement today, which is not really going to be contained. Like I said, it's like we're getting into summer flowers. There's just so many colors. It's going to be kind of contained, but like I'm also going to let it be really colorful, and I'll focus more on form. The mechanics I'm going to be using, so I have a flower frog in here, which it's just this heavy like paperweight type thing, and you can easily stick flowers in it, and they basically stay exactly where you put them. So if I'm putting anything woody into this flower frog, I would cut it at an angle. It's not going to really want to go in. So this smoke bush, for example, I would cut it on an angle and I would place it in, and then I would bend it to where I want it to be. If you try to cut a woody stem blunt when using a flower frog, it's going to be a lot harder. This one actually wasn't hard, but a lot of times it's a lot harder to stick it in. So cutting it on an angle is just helpful. You're kind of like giving it an easier route to stick into the pins, and then you can bend it in place. When you're working with softer stems, so if I were placing this foxglove, so pretty. With these flowers, you find the angle that you want them in, and then that's where you insert it. The stems are too soft to be able to start straight up and down and bend it into place. It would just rip the stem apart, and then you wouldn't have good contact. It eventually might like fall all the way down. So just something to consider. The woody stems always cut at an angle, start straight, and then bend. With the soft stems, put them at the angle intended. because this is a low, it's not super low. This is my first time using this particular bowl. I recently got this bowl and I thought it would be kind of like fun to see for you all to see kind of how I work through using a new vase instead of just me using like the same vase that I use all the time. A lot of times I just use like a low dish that's like 2.5 inches deep that just has enough water. And the reason I really like low bowls, this is a little bit higher, but it's still, the foot is really nice. I think that helps accentuate the flowers a little bit. So I do like the footed compotes. But the reason that I like working with low bowls is because if you're working towards something that is going to go in the center of a table that people are going to be around, you don't want to have something that's like super tall that's interrupting the conversation. And so being able to work in a low bowl is really helpful. And because of these frogs, you can cut things super short, you can angle them low. If I didn't have anything in this bowl, if I placed a stem without the frog, it would just kind of like fall over. But if I have this frog in here, like even this, like everything's just gonna wanna fall over. There are different things you can do. I'm not gonna use chicken wire today, but chicken wire, if you don't have a frog, is a great option. You can just put the chicken wire, tape it in. You can use a tape grid with Scotch tape. Like there are things you can do but you always do need some sort of mechanic in a low bowl, or everything is just kind of like gonna come out to the side. If you really didn't have any mechanic, like you don't have tape, you don't have a frog, you don't have anything, you can attempt to like lattice the stems. So you can like start putting foliage deep in the bowl and you kind of create a lattice with the stems. And what that lattice kind of acts like chicken wire in a way where it can start to catch flowers in the place that you want them. And so that is an option. Or some other creative things, like I've seen people like scrunching up moss. To me, that kind of seems like the water's gonna get dirty. But wood, like wood chip type, like wood elixir, I think it's called. Like you can get creative. You can certainly like vines wrapped up in here. You can get creative. You really just want to have something that's catching the flowers. And my preferred thing always these days, I just think frogs are the easiest thing. The frog will tip. And so when I'm placing flowers, like it is really heavy, but if I'm putting everything kind of towards one side, it has a tendency to tip. So there's something called sure stick. And with the sure stick, it's like a flower putty, and that could putty it to the bottom of the bowl. My preferred method, if you have this, is to use a sun and a moon kenzan. So sun, moon. And what you can do with this is you can put the sun here, and then you can use the moon as a back weight. And so I'm kind of just interlocking these needles and using that as a back weight. And now, like, I've never had issues with it tipping when it's that heavy. You also can just try to like balance, if balance is a part of your practice, if you're like, let me see if I can experiment and do, and I know I have friends that they just consider balance a part of the practice, and so they won't use anything. They'll just have it in here and they'll make sure that they're kind of balancing things as they go. So you don't need that, but just so you know what I'm going to be using, I'm going to be using this with a back weight. So I don't know if Elizabeth mentioned this, but you're welcome to ask any questions in the chat, and we're going to take a few moments throughout the program to answer those questions. And now that we have like our mechanics set, does anyone have any questions about that? Elizabeth, did you have any questions come through? Or if you have any questions about like the base mechanics, we can address those quickly.
No questions have come through about the base mechanics yet, so I think go ahead and we'll keep on the lookout.
Sweet. Okay, so Okay, so before I just start putting things in, I'm going to talk a little bit about material. So I like to think of flowers in these categories. So line flowers being the ones that are kind of creating the original shape for the arrangement. And this doesn't necessarily have to be foliage. I think foliage, like people think of green foliage as the first thing that always goes in an arrangement. And that's definitely a style. But I don't think it needs to be foliage. I think something that can kind of like create the shape that you want, because then you're kind of working within that shape and you know that like where your boundaries are. So I think, for example, that this foxglove could be a really good line flower to kind of create this shape. It's not obvious, like I wouldn't always say like foxglove is a line flower. Like all of these things are open to interpretation. Technically, this could be a line flower. It is, I would consider this like a foliage, but it could be a line flower. I think most things like could fit in this category. The smoke bush, again, I would consider this a foliage, but the foliage could be a line flower. This is how you could start your arrangement to start to create shape. But you just want to think, you want to look at the material you have, and you want to like kind of look at the things you have and say, okay, which one do I think would like create the shape that I'm looking for? And for me, I think that I'm going to try to do something like a little bit asymmetrical. I think the foxglove would be really nice. The next thing that I'm thinking of is something with volume. This could be like berries. You could like incorporate fruit here. So something with volume, like it has a lot of texture, and it's going to kind of like cover up your mechanics a little bit. It's going to cover up, if I had chicken wire, especially like because I'm just using the frog today, there's not a ton to actually cover up. But thinking of like having some volume and texture, I think this would also be great. I think this is what I'm going to use today, because I think like these pastels look really cool together. And this is like a really good volume to start to like create some fullness in the center. And then you have your focal flowers, and focals, like again, it's all based on your material. So in this case, if the two things that I had were this peony and this ranunculus, this would be my focal because it's the biggest, and this would be my medium flower. Now, if these are the flowers I had today, then the ranunculus would be my focal, and this butterfly ranunculus would be my medium. So it just depends on kind of what you have, where it fits into these categories. But in terms of designing in an order for these more, the class today is more of like a low naturalistic centerpiece. So this isn't necessarily the method I use for all arranging. Like if you look at my work, I'm super inspired by Ikebana, and that's a lot of times like I might only incorporate 2 flowers in that. So, but this class today is more of like kind of like a lush, full, naturalistic centerpiece, and we're kind of using all of these different components. So you have your focals and your mediums. And the reason you're going in this order, so you have the line flowers that are creating this container that you're kind of working within. The volume is kind of covering your mechanics a little. You want to get the focals in early because you want to have space for them. You don't want to be trying to add like big flowers like after the small little elements, because you might not have made enough space. Then you have your mediums, which can certainly like intersect with those. So like I'm always happy, and I'll show you when I design with this, I'm always happy that like the mediums kind of cut in front of the focals. Like I don't need every flower to have its like full day in the sun. Like in nature, you never see every single flower looking at you perfectly, all of it. Some of them are covered up by leaves a little bit. Some of them are facing a different direction. So I'm always trying to think about that. And so when we're making like a naturalistic centerpiece, we're just thinking about like having things at different heights, etc. The final component is accents. So this is just something that like is like very gestural. So something that kind of, in my mind, it always, I think of this component as like, if the wind were blowing, this thing would kind of be like floating in the wind. And so this agrostemma would be a beautiful example. Grasses for the accent are always beautiful. And I think with the accent, you're always, you're kind of softening the arrangement. And so you can see if I did all of accents, it would be a very like wildflower like arrangement, like a very soft, whimsical arrangement, which you could totally do. If you did all focals and medium flowers, it would be like pretty structural. If you did all line flowers and volume, it would be like a, I mean, I think that could kind of be structural as well and sculptural. It just kind of depends on where you go with it. But I think that could like give a lot of interesting movement as well. But so you don't always need to have these 5 components, but I do think it's helpful back to the experimentation. Like when you are experimenting with flowers, instead of just like looking at them and like making something and like loving it and being like, well, why do I love that? And that's being able to say like, oh, these are all super floaty and gestural and like move in the wind. And I tend to really like stuff like this. And so then you have the information moving forward to get the right material, because the right material, there's no right and wrong to flowers. The right material is going to be different from everyone. It's just kind of like having the vocabulary around like what these flowers are and how they can be used. So I'm going to get going. I'm going to use my foxglove. As the line flower. And you see, like, I'm pretty slow and intentional about designing. It's different when you are doing an event in a wedding, you just like have to move quicker. And they're still nice. When you see them in mass, it's kind of like a whole experience. When you're making just one piece for your home, it can really be like a practice, and you can be really slow and meditative about it. And so I would pick up what I'm going to be using as my line flowers today, and I'm kind of like seeing how they naturally fall, spinning them around in different directions and kind of deciding where to come. So you're just kind of like studying your material. So I just happen to like really like this shape. So I'm always cutting everything, even if it's the right length. I'm always, you know what? This is why I wanted to do a new bowl, because I knew that like some thoughts would come to my head while we were here, and I thought it would potentially be helpful for you all to see. So I think I am actually going to put chicken wire on top of this frog, only because the bowls I'm usually working in are really shallow. And because this bowl, I'm going to want things to angle here, and I have nothing here to catch it because my frog is here. The frog is going to be really critical for like the accents and other things. But if I want something to stay right here, it could be kind of hard with the frog. So I'm going to add the chicken wire in, because I think the chicken wire will just give this element where like if I put it here, it will catch it. So I'm going to put the chicken wire on top. With this tape, know that it's called waterproof tape, made by Oasis. It is waterproof in that after I'm done with this arrangement, I can dunk the whole thing with the tape underwater, and it's not gonna come undone, but it will not stick to a vase if it's wet. So just know that. Sometimes, like if I make a last minute call like this, and I happen to get the rim of my vessel wet, it can be frustrating. It happens to be dry, so. I usually I'm doing this backwards, like mirror, so I don't have the edge of the table to really work on when I'm holding things up against the vase. But if I were you, what I would probably be doing to like test out where things are falling is I oftentimes like hold it at the edge of the table, and then where the edge meets the table, that's kind of where you want to cut it. And so I'm kind of doing it backwards. I'm holding it in front so I don't have the luxury of like being able to have my stem off the table. Another trick that you can do is like, if I want this to land like here, I can flip it upside down. And so the stem is going to be here. So I can cut it right around here. So if you don't have an edge of the table to work on, this is helpful. So for each component, if you're trying to have each component if you're trying to have this like full naturalistic arrangement with all of these components, I'm usually thinking it's going to be different for every, for all your material, because material is just so different. Like this smoke bush that I showed you, for example, like this is such a, oh, where did it go? That's not the right piece because it's not as big, but okay, this one's kind of big. So like this, for example, this is my volume. This is a really big piece of smoke bush. And so like, it's hard for me to say with a blanket statement, like get 5 to 7 stems of every component, because I don't think it always ends up like that. Like maybe I only need 1 stem of the smoke bush. But if you are trying to plan, like if you're an event planner, or like if you're in the, if you do event design, or like you kind of need to know more specifics, I would say like 5 to 7 stems of each category, and then depending on like if you want it to be more wildflowery, go heavier on the accents. If you want it to be more like big flowers, structural, go heavier on the focal. So it doesn't have to always be the even amount of these stems, but just something to consider. So I think that I'll probably use, and you'll see what I use after, but like I think I'm probably gonna use about 5 to 7 stems is usually what I end up using for each component. Another thing to consider, so like these are pretty, these green tips, and I might leave them, but something that I have been doing, I won't do it to my peach ones because I don't have that many. I'll do it to my to one that I have more of. So something to think about is every flower you can really manipulate in a different way. So like, let's say you want it to be super color forward and you're not interested in having this green, you can just clip the top off. And I know it like changes the flower, but look how much, and I might come in and edit this at the end and actually cut the tops off of these just to make it like super color forward. But this is way more color forward now than this. It's just different. It just turns it into like a different flower. And with design, you can really manipulate every flower, like to kind of make it your own. So I'm kind of going in this like asymmetrical shape where this is going to be a little bit higher and this is going to be a little bit lower. And I wouldn't be like super tied in the beginning when you get started. Like you kind of think it's going in one direction, but like I try not to be super tied to it in the beginning because it really does change. And also things move, especially you'll notice things are moving if you're using something like just the chicken wire. Like everything I'm placing right now that is in the frog is really staying put. If you're using the chicken wire, it's only, things are going to move around a little bit in the beginning until you start to build that lattice. Because the squares are about 1 inch wide, so things will kind of shift. But things will start to stay as you go. So don't get too attached to the placement in the beginning. So now that I've done my line flowers, I'm going to move into my volume, and so that you can know my thought process, I could either use the smoke bush. This is like moody. I just feel like it's not reminiscent of like the way that I feel today. It's like super hot in DC. It's actually, we got a breeze today, but like it's been really hot and it's just summery and there's lots of color and the trees are bright. And so like, I just think something like brighter and uplifting. So I'm going to go with this instead. And to be honest, I'm blanking on the name of this. Elizabeth, maybe you know it, but so I'm gonna put this low in the bowl, always putting the volume like super low in the bowl. And I often like to intersect the lip because sometimes you have like an arrangement and then you have all the flowers on top of it. It just feels like this separate thing, sorry, the vase, and then all the arrangement, the flowers and the arrangement on top of it, and it feels like two very stark things. And I think if you can have some things kind of like spill over and cut off that lip, it kind of works into that more like naturalistic. If you looked above right now, you would see that everything is angled. I'm never kind of putting anything in straight up and down. Like I said, with the frog, if you are using the woody stems, you would want to go straight up and down and kind of bend it into place. None of these are woody, these are all really soft. But when I say nothing's going in straight up and down, I'm more talking about angle. So you want things to have like good depth. And I'm thinking about cutting everything at different lengths and having some things go forward, some things come back. Something that I do in my Ikebana practice, and Ikebana, for those of you that don't know or aren't familiar with like the work that I do, it's the Japanese style of flower arranging, which I just absolutely love. I think it's super impactful. It's very accessible. In that you only have to have a few flowers. Like you can make something absolutely beautiful with like 6 stems. And it's super impactful. Just to show you what I'm doing here. So right now this doesn't want to stick into the frog, and because I put the chicken wire on top, I can't actually reach the frog to hold it in place and like so that it doesn't move. So I'm taking my clippers and I'm kind of holding it down. You could also use another stem. Sometimes I'll just use another flower and I'll hold it down. Clippers work well. So I'm kind of like holding this in place so that I can press it in to where I want it. So with this Ikebana practice, one of the things we think about is like bringing stuff towards your left shoulder and towards your right shoulder. And that will help you think about depth. So instead of just working it across the line, you're thinking about like having things like come towards you. And I think that adds a lot of interest to the arrangement. I'm also like a minimalist. Now I'm like, I just want to stop here. It's like, it's done. It's beautiful. I'm happy with it. It's done. I'm gonna do the full thing, but like I actually just absolutely love these colors together, and I think that like if this were for my home, like I might stop, but I'm gonna see it through. I'm gonna see it through. Also, it's like fun to see the whole thing through as well. So just again, thought process. Like I think I'm gonna leave this open because I actually really love this white glaze. And so if I cover it, then like a lot of times, like you'll see in my work that mango piece, that was actually in a bowl. Let me pull that back up so you can actually see. Okay, so this was actually done in a bowl, a very low bowl, and I had everything kind of cover the front. So it looks like it's just coming off the table. A lot of people on the internet would probably assume that I did that piece in foam. Flower foam, if you're not familiar, it's like this green brick, and you soak it in water and then you stick flowers in it, and it's super easy to use, but it's really not great for the environment. It's like made up of a bunch of microplastics and it gets into our waterways, and so I personally try to not use foam. But when you see this mango piece, you think it was just like a small piece of foam like on the table that I put stuff in, but truly it's like a very low bowl, and I have just angled things to come out and kind of cover that low bowl, which I think is really beautiful. But because I think this vase is so special, I am going to make sure that I leave a little bit of this like foot showing and a little bit of the vase cutting it off. So I actually think I have enough volume. I think I'm gonna stop. You can always like come back. So I do like to work in the order where you're doing line flowers, volume, focals, medium, accents. But if you need to revisit one, if you need to come in and add more line flowers, you need to add more, like there's no rule to that. I just think it's like a nice way to have a focus when you're approaching an arrangement, so it's not totally random. And you can have a little bit of consistency. And so the order I think is nice. So next I'm going to be placing the focal flowers. And again, thinking about having them at all different heights. So you see how short I'm cutting that. It takes a little bit of guts in the beginning because you really just don't want to cut things that short. But if you have things that are this short, the beautiful part is then you can have things that kind of come above and you can kind of see where the depth comes in here, where you can start to make it feel really dynamic. Whereas like if everything was out here and you didn't cut anything short, it would, to me, that kind of feels flat. So cutting some things kind of short where you might even be like, oh my gosh, I'm kind of hiding that. Like it doesn't, I can't even really see that anymore. Like, why would you put this here? It's hidden. I think like, again, it kind of comes back to the practicing like the Japanese style of arranging too. They're very open to having things being covered, having things in different stages, like having some things in bud stage is totally fine. Everything doesn't have to be fully open. And some things can be like hidden and peeking out, and it will eventually give it depth. So these are peonies, which hopefully you got to work with peonies a little bit this year. I feel like, I don't know, I feel like they've been great this year. I guess it's just, they're probably great every year. I maybe just got access to more of them this year. There are so many different colors, and it's something really easy to grow in your garden. It's a perennial. It will just keep producing for you. They're prolific blooms. And yeah, I think like it's one of those things that's really easy to grow at home, and we'll just keep coming back and keep getting bigger and keep getting more blooms each year. Also thinking about like kind of clustering to kind of slow your eye down. So I'm not necessarily just dotting everything around. You kind of see how I have a cluster of foxglove. I have a cluster of, I'm kind of keeping them in groups. And personally, I just think that helps your eye kind of slow down and kind of move throughout the piece, opposed to kind of seeing it as like one big arrangement that's just like all different things in one. Someone's ringing my doorbell. I'm glad I did the chicken wire, but it is a little bit harder because now I have to keep sticking the clippers in and holding it in place because it's so new to, because I can't, it's really nice with the frog to like get as close as possible, like because I can really stick it in here, whereas like if I'm holding it out here and trying to stick it in, it's not quite as easy, but I don't know peonies. I think I'm good on the peonies. I actually only used 4. Everyone always asks, like, how do you feel about odd numbers? Like, it's funny because I actually used 4 foxglove as well, and I only used 4 peonies. I think using even numbers is fine. as long as you are like doing the clumping method. Like if it kind of feels odd. So to me, like this kind of feels odd because it's like different heights and like it's a little bit asymmetrical is maybe what I mean. So it doesn't feel like there's one here and there's one here and they're like even. It doesn't look like bunny ears or something where you have them even. It's kind of, because it's asymmetrical, I think you can get away with using even numbers because it still feels kind of odd, which in turn, the reason that you want odd numbers often is because they feel, they give you a sense of balance. Another thing I want to point out, so you kind of see like how if I'm doing something over here, I almost always kind of like balance it out with something of that same color over here. I might actually let me grab another peony. I think it might be valuable. So like if I did want to put one, I don't know. I think that's a little full for me. But I think if I was going to add one, if you're more of like a maximalist and you want it to be super full, I think one there could be really lovely. Should I go for it? I wish I could see all your faces so I could get nods to see what you all are thinking. I'll test it out. Well, we can all test it out together. Do like it. I'll leave it. It's pretty great. Okay, so my medium, I don't really know if I have a great medium. So I think I might go straight to accents. I do have some like really cool purple flowers. I kind of view these as accent flowers. They do have a lot of movement, but I think I might be able to use these and to kind of soften the whole thing up again with like it kind of feeling like light and breezy and summer-like. I think having like a lot of movement just kind of fits the season right now. So I might just skip the mediums. Like I have some ranunculus, but it kind of feels just heavy. The ranunculus are kind of on their last length right now seasonally. And so I kind of feel like it's kind of moving into wildflower season. So I think I'm gonna go heavy on the accents and just like get in here and make it super airy and soft. And so with these, again, I'm still gonna be thinking about clumping. A lot of times to help with that, you can put 3 stems in at once, just so that you know you're kind of hitting it. So instead of doing, and I do that with grasses too. Putting a few of them in all at the same time. Again, like coming down to that opposite side. You see my focus face. Sometimes I catch myself. I definitely have a focus face. I've been trying to do some more like filming, arranging, and stuff. And if you if you're an Instagram user, I've been trying to do like more like video tips on the Reels feature and stuff. And in turn, like I've never really filmed myself before. And in turn, I've been filming myself, and it's just like that I've never really known that I had this like focus face. I guess when I was in like school playing sports and they were like took sports pictures of me. I guess I saw that type of focus face, but I didn't realize it translated over to flowers so much. You can kind of see that I'm leaving this space in here, and I might come in and edit out a little bit more. Like again, going with this asymmetrical, like I think just having things higher on one side and lower on the other side, I personally just really like that. And so I'm kind of trying to stick with that. And then also like, if I can have stuff actually spill out down a little bit, sometimes if I had a vine or something that kind of would spill onto the table, I don't. But something to consider to kind of, we talked about bringing the volume or whatever flower it is over the lip a little bit. If you can actually have something kind of fall onto the table. Maybe it's like a fruit component or something like that. I think that's always lovely. I don't happen to have like a droopy vine, but definitely something to think about. I think that would be really nice here. Like even like some grapes or something to kind of drape over here would be really pretty. Coming back, I often, like I said, I often at least not always, it's really not essential, but I do think like I have a little bit of the white agrostemma in here that I just put in, and I do think the white kind of draws your attention to the arrangement because it's such a strong highlight. So I find that when I have an arrangement like in my room or something and it has white in it, I tend to look at it more, which I mean, that's ultimately you want to be able to like appreciate the flowers that are in your home. And I do, it's something to just take note of. Also, just one thing to point out, you notice that like none of the flowers are directly facing you. And that's going back to this naturalistic thing where things are kind of in different directions and it's just kind of like a loose natural piece. Whereas, and everything like truly like this is super short, this is long, everything's at different heights. It's not your like classic traditional like round thing where everything has its place, but this is just kind of like a style where you're kind of like letting things fall where they may. Like I said in the beginning, you're kind of taking the stem and seeing where it like naturally wants to fall, and then that's kind of where you're placing it. Like you can even feel the weight in your hand a little bit and be like, okay, yeah, this like clearly wants to just kind of droop over in this direction, and so you can honor that. Elizabeth, do you have any? I think that could be nice to kind of like soften this front up a little bit because it kind of feels like wildflowery over here, but it's still a little bit structured over here, which is nice. You never really know when to stop. I feel like a lot of people say like, when do you know when to stop? I really think you can tinker forever. Again, when you're doing event work, you know when to stop because you allocate maybe like 40 minutes or so for each arrangement, and then that's like when you stop. When you're doing stuff for your home, I mean, if you look at it as an art practice, you can kind of go on forever, like pick out, edit. I often edit after, like, I think it would actually be beneficial for me to look at this from the front and edit a little bit. But Elizabeth, are there any questions that I can answer right now?
Yes, I'm happy to share some questions.
Yes.
Do you have any recommendations for cut flowers that are particularly easy for beginners to work with in this kind of format with frogs and with the wire?
Really, like, I think for the accessibility aspect, like flowers are really expensive, and I think just like if you are lucky enough to have a yard, just work with grasses. One thing I do want to say about grasses is that like when you're working with a frog and you're trying to put grasses in individually, like they might not want to stay. So one thing you might do is tape the bottom to kind of make it one stem, like one thick stem instead of, and then this is kind of how they are in nature as well. So you're already kind of like clumping them, but if you want to like tape the bottom with either like the floral tape or the waterproof tape will work, or rubber band it if you don't have that stuff, or twine it together. I think that's helpful when you have really skinny stems. In terms of what's easy to work with, I think really just like working with what you have. The best way you're going to get better at this, like, is just practice, and you'll learn a lot about different materials if you're just kind of like clipping a few stems or a branch or things like that from your yard and just kind of playing around. You'll learn a lot, and then in hindsight, like I mentioned, like always looking back at it and being like, okay, why am I into this? Why am I not? Because like there's stuff every day that I like that I make, and then there's stuff that like I could work on it for 2 hours and just like not resonate. But instead of just ending there, like trying to figure out kind of why, and then that will help you moving forward.
Thank you. Can you tell us what the flowers are in the vase to your left?
I think the camera might be reversed.
Yes.
This side or this side? These?
Yes, that one.
Okay. The agrostemma.
Thank you.
Really so beautiful, right? Like just a dream. You can direct seed them, which is amazing. At least in our area, you can direct seed them. They come up, they grow like wildflowers, and they're super beautiful. I think they're absolutely stunning. So.
You've mentioned your floral practice a few times. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means to you and how you act on that?
Yeah, so I think it's been something it's a constant, I'm constantly working at it. I think it's like every art practice where it's like, or maybe you journal or any like habit forming type thing that that you want to incorporate in life. And like flowers are one of those things for me. I think it helps me to stay connected to the seasons and like also like get better at design, but I feel like I learn a lot through having I attempt a daily practice to be frank. There's not every day that I get to it, but I think that I try to set a timer for an hour, and that really helps me just to get going. Because there's a finite amount of time where it's like, okay, I have these flowers. I try to collect at least 10 stems, whether I buy them or I cut them from the yard or from my tree box outside. I try to have at least 10 stems and just make something. And through that, I feel like I grow a lot you end up learning a lot about the plant material you're working with because each time you're kind of working with something different. So you like learn like what is agrostemma, how does it behave, how does it fall. I'm super into plants like actual like plant science, so I end up exploring them that way. And I think just like having a daily practice of something small, sometimes it stays at those 10 stems and sometimes it's like a bigger piece, just helps me continue to grow in my flower practice and understand like what I like in terms of form and color. It's just a constant exploration.
How long have you been working in floral design?
6 years.
Nice.
And yeah, I started working on a flower farm. I worked on a flower farm for 3 years, which I think that was like a good place to start because it was like, it kind of like taught me that experimentation. It's like what you have there, you kind of work with, and instead of where like a lot of event designers are working like more client based, it's like, what does your client want? And you're fulfilling that. And which is great. I understand that's really necessary for business, but I do think it's like, I think flowers can be accessible as a home like practice, even like as a meditative thing, like coming up with prompts. Sometimes like if I'm stuck, I'll come up with a prompt like I'm trying to think of one, like even like fruit, like I try to like incorporate fruit, and I'm like, if I'm stuck, I'll just try to think of a prompt to kind of like focus me and just start some experimenting.
And to bring us back to today's arrangement, were you designing this to be viewed from a particular angle or from a 360 view?
So that's a great question. So because of this mirror, in person I might have spun it. So sometimes I'll work on a lazy Susan. To be honest, I usually just spin it with my hands. I do have a lazy Susan, but I more so spin it with my hands. And so, but if I were designing it 360, I would be kind of like, I usually do a front and a back for 360. And so it's more, I guess, half and half. It's not so 360 because we at my home and most events that I do have long tables. And I think you can maintain that negative space and the asymmetry when you're working with a front and a back. And it's much harder to do when you're trying to, like, if you're trying to get it like that from all sides, you can kind of lose the vision. So I usually work if I am trying to have it be seen from all sides, I usually work with one side and then the alternate side. And then I'll obviously like look at these two sides to make sure that they balance out and are visually appealing. But my main focus is like one side and then the other. And that's something that like, yeah, you definitely have to consider where are you going to be placing it um, so you know how to design.
We have time for one last question. So can you tell us a little bit about the chicken wire you use? Is that a specialty floral product or something you get at a hardware store?
Yes, I got it at Home Depot. I buy a big roll. If you're only using it for flowers and you're just doing home practice, it'll last you a really long time. You can share with friends. I use the vinyl coated normally because it doesn't rust in the water. The other one is fine too, the non-vinyl coated, but if you do leave the water in for a while, especially if it's like a grassy thing, grasses will last in a vase sometimes like for weeks. And so if you're doing an arrangement that does last for weeks, the chicken wire will rust if it's not vinyl coated. If you're working with these types of flowers, the flowers will die in a week anyway, so week and a half. So usually won't have time to rust by that point, but that's one reason why I get the vinyl.
Well, great. Thank you. So thank you so much for joining us today to the audience, and thank you to Arrin for this fantastic presentation.